Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a radical, honestly kind of mind-bending shift in how we understand our very own biology. We're looking at a fascinating paper by Dr. Mesut Tez titled DNA as the Sediment of Biological Becoming. Now, if you've ever thought of your DNA as the ultimate, unquestionable boss of your body, well, prepare to have your perspective entirely flipped. Dr. Tez is proposing a massive paradigm shift here, moving away from viewing our genetic makeup as these static, bossy little entities, and instead seeing them as historically conditioned processes. It's an absolutely thrilling way to look at life, so let's dive right in. Think about it. We constantly hear DNA described as the blueprint, the genetic code, the program, or even the book of life. These metaphors are just incredibly deeply entrenched in modern biology. And what they do is implicitly position DNA at the absolute center of the biological universe. They treat it like this microscopic architect sitting inside our cells, dictating literally all of our biological outcomes. Now, sure, it's an easy way to think about genetics, but Dr. Tez argues that it brings along a massive hidden assumption about how biological causation actually works. Which brings us to a really provocative question. What if everything we believe about DNA is philosophically backwards? What if treating DNA as the primary cause, the initiator of all life's processes, is actually just a huge philosophical assumption rather than a proven scientific fact? Dr. Tez points out that we've kind of tacitly conflated DNA's ability to persist over time with causal primacy. Basically, we assume that just because it's stable, it must be the boss running the show. So where did we even get this assumption? Well, it's called the atomistic bias. It's something we inherited way back from classical physics, this idea that stable, enduring molecules have to proceed and determine any higher-level organization. But as the source material points out, if you take DNA outside of a living, historically conditioned process, it's actually completely chemically inert. Without the complex cellular environments and the history of the organism it participates in, DNA doesn't actually do anything. It's really just a molecule sitting there. Okay, let's dive into this clash of perspectives. The traditional atomistic view sees DNA as static, the primary cause of biological action. But the new paradigm Dr. Tez is proposing, the process view, flips this entirely on its head. In this view, DNA is secondary. It's an emergent outcome of a biological process, not the starting line. It's the stabilization of biological history, rather than the initiating source. To really wrap our heads around this, we're going to need a whole new philosophical framework. Section 1. A universe of processes. To make this leap, Dr. Tez draws heavily on the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead, who completely shifted our view from a universe of enduring substances to a dynamic, ongoing world of continuous becoming. To really get Whitehead, we have to grasp what he calls actual occasions. In this view, reality isn't made up of static stuff. It's composed of events, these fleeting moments of becoming. Each actual occasion grabs aspects of the past, integrates them, and creates something entirely new. And once that moment is complete, it perishes, but it leaves itself behind as data for the very next event of becoming. So everything is an event, not a permanent object. And that brings us to another brilliant concept, concrescence. This is the momentary unification of a bunch of contextual influences into a single, novel act of becoming. Think about a biological system for a second. Like just a single cell in your body. It's continually gathering influences from its environment, its past, and its current state, and it's integrating all of that into a situated response. That momentary active integration, that is a concrescence. So if everything's a fleeting event, why does DNA even exist as a solid physical molecule? Well, in process philosophy, stability is emergent, not primitive. Physical matter itself isn't the starting point of reality. It's simply a comparatively stable outcome of these constant churning processes. When patterns of becoming repeat over and over and over again, they stabilize. Matter is essentially just a slowed-down, historically patterned process. Section 2. DNA as crystallized knowledge. Now that we've established that matter is just a stabilized process, let's walk through exactly how this happens step by step. Dr. Tez calls this processual sedimentation. First, a biological system faces multiple contextual conditions. Second, it integrates those conditions through concrescence into a unified response. Third, if that specific response is highly successful, it gets repeated over vast stretches of evolutionary time. And finally, step 4, that repeated, successful pattern acquires such immense stability that it precipitates or hardens into a material constraint. And that material constraint is DNA. Biological habits eventually stabilize and harden into matter.
As Dr. Tez writes, DNA represents the ultimate expression of this sedimentation. Its molecular structure isn't some predetermined plan that nature just dreamed up in advance. Rather, it embodies the durable trace of historically successful biological activity. It's literally the physical record of what has consistently worked across countless generations.
And this brilliantly illustrates the difference between our old metaphors and this new reality. The old view sees DNA as a prescriptive code, a set of strict instructions dictating exactly what must occur. But the new view? It sees DNA as crystallized knowledge. It represents the memory of what has been biologically possible. Its role is permissive. It shapes a space of possibilities, acting way more like a set of boundary conditions than a micromanaging script.
Section 3. The Biological Habitus.
To further explain how DNA guides us without forcing our biology down a super rigid path, Dr. Tez borrows a concept from the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu called habitus. Habitus refers to historically formed, embodied dispositions that guide action without explicit awareness or strict deterministic control. Now, Bourdieu used this for human social behavior, but Dr. Tez argues it applies perfectly to molecular biology. DNA is our biological habitus. It's historically constituted and it guides cellular action, but it doesn't determine it with absolute rigidity. Instead, it shapes tendencies and probabilities.
Because of this, we can view DNA as structured improvisation. Think about your own traits. Your biology isn't a strict script you're forced to read verbatim. DNA narrows the space of viable responses so your cells don't have to constantly guess what to do, but it preserves an openness to novelty. This perfectly explains things like context-dependent gene expression and developmental plasticity. Your genes are dynamically interacting with the environment to improvise contextually appropriate responses. It's structured, for sure, but it's still improvisation.
Section 4. Toward a processual biology.
So why does this massive conceptual shift actually matter? Well, first off, it completely dissolves the old dichotomy between genotype and phenotype. Traditionally, genotype is the cause and phenotype is the effect, right? But in a perceptual view, they're just moments on an ongoing continuum. Genotypes are simply historical processes that have sedimented into constraints, and phenotypes, they're just the contemporary real-time expression of those exact same historical processes. That strict boundary between them completely vanishes.
So, the crucial point is, this matters deeply because it challenges the whole reductionist idea that we can explain complex life just by pointing to isolated molecular components. It forces biology to embrace complex systems, emergent properties, and network dynamics. On a practical level, it means researchers should shift their focus to longitudinal and interdisciplinary studies, asking not just what do genes do, but actively investigating how these genetic constraints emerge from and feed back into dynamic biological processes.
This entire paradigm shift is perfectly summarized by this absolutely powerful thought from the paper. DNA is not the book of life. It is the frozen residue of sentences life has written again and again. Ontologically speaking, DNA is the sediment of successful biological becoming. It is the crystallized habitus of living systems.
So, knowing what we've just covered, I want you to ask yourself, are you a static being dictated by a microscopic blueprint? Or are you a continuous improvisational event of becoming? By moving from a biology of static substances to one of historically conditioned processes, we open up entirely new ways to understand life's stability, its endless creativity, and its enduring mysteries. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking the big questions.